My name is Jo Miller and I'm the Commercial Director at Vertical Advantage, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all to the first in a series of hopefully interactive webinars on diversity and inclusion. Today we're focusing on the subject of disability, and we're thrilled to have Liz Johnson with us to share a little bit about her experience. Liz has a full set of major championship gold medals and a complete set of Paralympic medals from an international career spanning, is it 20 years, Liz? You're old enough to
have. I like to think that, but yeah, no, it was a long time, big portion of my
life. And you also had the honour of reading the athlete's oath at the opening ceremony of the London 2012 Paralympic Games. Very impressive, I have to say.
It was scary.
Yes. Amazing. And then you retired in 2016 after a hernia operation, is that right?
Yeah. So again, I was like, to say that you retired at 30, people are always like, what? But again, like I said, I'd been swimming for 20 years, and everything just aligned. I think the stars all aligned, and then the hernia operation happened, and I just didn't. My recovery wasn't as quick as I'd hoped. So then I lost a lot of time out of the water, and then Channel 4 offered me a job, like to go to Rio to present with them. So, and I was like, you know what, this everything's coming together. It's the right time. So yeah, I retired, but I think that gave me perspective to help me in the world I'm currently working in, because I think like you can have that cheesy everything happens for a reason, but it's not so much. You have to look for the reason sometimes. But yeah, so I retired and then obviously started doing some other stuff.
Other things. You've been very busy, haven't you? And so in 2018 you founded The Ability People, which helps people find meaningful employment, people with disabilities find meaningful employment, but you also work to help organisations to normalise difference and to create, I think your words are, an authentically inclusive workplace. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So like again, and the Ability People is kind of organically evolved as we've developed and we've found out more about the world that we're trying to operate in, and the need for what's out there. And actually it's exactly that. Like, we do come at it from primarily the angle of disability, because that's where my knowledge is and that's where my team's knowledge and expertise are. So, and that's where the idea for the ability stemmed from, because basically like you said, I was a swimmer, and I was really fortunate to be a swimmer. But like, the Paralympic movement wasn't what it is now when I was a little girl. And so, but one thing it taught me was what's possible, because when we were like, I was 10 when I decided I wanted to go to Paralympics, and it was the year of the Atlanta Olympics and Paralympics, so 1996. And I remember saying to my parents, oh, I want to go to the Paralympics. And like, I was really always very, very sporty and very competitive. And like, my parents had always been really good at making sure I had the same opportunities as everybody else. Like, I didn't miss out on anything because I was born with a disability. But that's what shocked me even more about the fact that we were in that world. Like, I have a disability and I love sport, and yet I didn't know what the Paralympics was. I hadn't even heard about the Paralympics really, but again, it was because it wasn't on TV. It didn't get any coverage, and you had to. I was fortunate. I was in the right place at the right time, and it just so happened that one of the lifeguards that worked at the pool where I went to my swimming lessons ran a swimming club for people with disabilities. But I'd always been like, well, I don't need to go that because I'm not disabled. And I think that's an important distinction to make, which I think we're going to make later. The difference, like, one of the key things here is working out the difference between being disabled and having a disability. But so in that world, I was just very much like, oh, okay, no, I'm fine. And then like, I'd always, and again, it's not a negative, it's a positive, but you realize it's sometimes unnecessary. Is if you're different in some way, you're striving to prove to everybody that you can in spite of. But I think the older and wiser I've got, I've realized that you shouldn't have to in spite of, because like I said about making environments authentically inclusive, there's more than one way to do something. And actually, by removing unnecessary barriers, you're not making it easier for anybody. You're just making it fair in terms of an equitable experience and opportunity. So with that, I mean, like when I was swimming, like it takes me more energy. That's a fact, because I have half a body that works, so that's like fully. So that means that I obviously naturally exert more energy to do the same amount of things. That's a fact. That's never going to change. But if I'd always been then trying to strive to reach the same qualifying times and goals as my able-bodied peers who had fully functioning limbs, then I was never going to be able to achieve that. And so sport, whilst it is no longer like the main thing in my life, I think it helped me with where I am and where the ability people is, because it gave me context, and also others can relate to that. Other people know that the Paralympics, they didn't really understand it or know what it was or know where to find it or know how to get into it if they had a child or person in their family who wanted to maybe attempt to go to the Paralympics. Nobody knew where that was. Whereas now, in 2020, everybody knows about the Paralympics. They might not know it a lot, like loads about it, but then a lot of people don't know loads about the Olympics because they don't care about sport. But the point is, if you know what the Olympics is now, you know what the Paralympics is. And I think that's why I set up the ability people, because I want everybody to have that opportunity wherever their interest lies, not only if they want to be an athlete. Because in reality, whenever you go into a meeting, whether there's 10 people or 500 people, if you ask how many people are Olympians, how many do you expect to put how many realistically put their hands up? Not many. And then if you ask them if they've got a medal, even less would. And then if you ask them if they've got an Olympic gold medal, then even less would. And so it frustrated me massively that people, in order for a person with a disability to validate themselves or to be accepted often in that transition into a world of work, people would be like, well, have you been to the Paralympics? Or what else do you do? Or what do you do? But I think sometimes there are extra challenges because the world is not set up for people who are different. And so I think what we do at the Ability People is try to humanize this idea and this journey that everyone's going on, because it's difficult. Like, it's really hard if you've never experienced difference before, had exposure to it, then how are you going to understand it? But I think everybody needs to start somewhere. And often there's this idea of like this fear that surrounds it, because you don't want to look like you don't know something you should know. You don't want to cause offense unintentionally. And you don't want to, more than anything, you don't want to upset the person you're talking to. So quite often then what happens is you do nothing. But actually we're all in this together. We're all humans, and we owe it to each other to grow as individuals together, because historically the only way we've ever increased our knowledge and our understanding of something is by immersing ourselves in it and learning more about it.
Well, that sort of leads me really neatly to the first question, actually, Liz, which is, I think inclusion and diversity have been on the agendas for most of our clients for some time. I think we hear the conversations a lot, but actually I think a lot of those conversations are taking place in the boardroom and at strategic level. By the time that message gets to us as recruiters, it's completely diluted, because we're dealing with a hiring manager who has a pressing need and possibly has found a solution for hiring that he or she defaults to. So I guess the first question really is, how do you convert that and make that into a commercial argument for somebody that needs someone in their team? What is the value to them? I think we all agree we're nice people. We see the ethical, principle of inclusion. I think we're all bought into that. But what is the commercial argument?
I think actually the commercial argument is far bigger than the ethical one, because, and by that I mean, like, yes, it's nice to do the right thing, but unless you're doing the right thing for the right reasons with purpose, then it's actually pointless to do the right thing, in inverted commas. And actually, ultimately, in an organization, whatever level you operate at, you want the best people available to you in that team. You're all in this together. You want to be the most efficient, you want to be the most effective. And what we've learned throughout 2020 is you want an adaptable, resilient, dedicated and loyal workforce. And actually, it doesn't make the bit where the commercial value comes in is why would you be missing out on 15% of the population? Because 15% of the population globally are registered to have a disability of some kind. And that doesn't include those that are undiagnosed or fly under the radar or have never been in the right place at the right time for someone to pick up on the fact that they might have a difference of some kind. But it doesn't mean that they don't, and it doesn't mean that they could operate more effectively. So by becoming authentically inclusive and opening your doors, so to speak, to everybody, then you are able to pick the best of the best to put in your team. And I think, again, because you don't often, I think we come at it from the wrong angle. We come at it from like, how can we get more people with disabilities or difference of some kind into the organization, and we focus so much on their difference that we forget what we want them to do. And actually what we really want to be able to do is look at what we want out of a role, put it out there, highlight and shout about the fact that you want to be inclusive and you're on a journey and you will do everything you can to make sure that somebody gets an equitable recruitment experience. But actually people don't want to be hired to fill a quota. They don't, because what that does is, one, it's like, well, did you only want me because I helped your quota? But two, it means other people in the team might be like, well, they're only here because they filled that quota. And so what you want is actually to approach it as a human and look at it as a human. So the commercial value comes in, actually people who are different and are trying to survive in a world that is not built for them are constantly problem solving. And that's not just people with disabilities, that's anybody who's got any different, if someone's used to having a 8:45 meeting every Tuesday, but they're coming back to work after having another child, or after the transition between their child going from nursery, where you can drop them off at 7:30 in the morning, to go into school where maybe there's no breakfast club. Why does that person then have to make a decision between their career and their child and their responsibility in their life? So it's not this is just not limited to people with disabilities, but what it does is it shows that we're always constantly, as humans, having to adapt. And actually you want those people in your team that are good at being faced with a problem, but not panicking, not stressing, and being the person who's like, right, well, why don't we think of it from this angle? And what happens a lot, and I used to say it all the time, and I learned it through my career as an athlete, but obstacles actually create opportunities. And so by that, I mean, someone might put an idea forward that no one else has ever thought about because they've never needed to think about it in that way. And the other thing is that it gives you perspective, because if you're constantly problem solving in your life, well, if you hit a barrier at work, in terms of a team organizational barrier, everyone's trying to fit, then you're like, okay, another one, let's sit down, let's go through the process of how I normally solve a problem, and let's see if it's possible. Whereas if you've only got like-minded people, or you've only replaced a person who's left with someone who was like them, then the chances are they're going to take the same course of action and you're going to hit the same problems.
Yeah, I think we've had 2 clients in the last year that have worked with us to implement or been interested in working with us to implement sort of diversity orientated change to the recruitment process, but both have been about race and gender. And I don't think this is on people's radar at the moment. So coming back to your point then, how can, I mean, there's a broad range of listeners on the call today, and some of them are from great big global organizations, some are from smaller, localized businesses within London. I guess, it would be great to hear about how you've implemented a hiring strategy that avoids tokenism. I think that's probably something that you've just touched on there that would be really helpful to understand. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the place to start with this is when you're looking at inclusion, diversity, what we're actually talking about, because you can change up how things look and make a place diverse, but to be diverse, you don't have to be inclusive. But if you are authentically inclusive, you will naturally become diverse, because society is diverse. And therefore, if you're hiring the best people, not the best people out of this category or out of this section or out of this 25 people, then you will naturally end up with the best people and the most diverse. And so
that's where at the ability people, that's what we did. So our main goal was, well, we had two main goals. Our main goal was to create meaningful employment opportunities for people with disabilities or barriers to conventional work environments through medical required needs. And the second was then to help further that, like, wider than within the ability people. So within the ability people, what we did was found people who are like-minded in the sense that they're all orientated to that goal, but anything else like didn't really matter. And as a result, we ended up with a core team of 14 people who are very diverse, but all invested in the same overall outcome. But it means we bring lots of different life experiences. So in our team of 14, the youngest is 25, the eldest is 57. We have a fairly even balance of females and males. Like some people acquired their impairments, because obviously that's a very different experience if you're adjusting to life post an accident or post an incident that's made you acquire your disability, or someone who was born with your disability. So we have a bit of a split. We have a split of people who went to university, and people who didn't, people who are parents, people who are not, like the full, like BAME, different sexual orientations. We've got the full range. But so we try to be the personification of what we are helping others to do, because I think people don't necessarily, they need to see it to believe it, basically. And in order to move away from tokenism, what we did with we've done it with a lot of organizations, but one big project was, rather than get the current system and try to make reasonable adjustments, we would ask the question of, what are you trying to achieve from this round of assessment? And then so they would say, and then we would work back from that to see the different ways in which you could assess somebody for that, or somebody could demonstrate a skill in that area. Because I think sometimes we look to adapt a process, again, for people who require it, but people who are different, they know they're different, and they know they've got different needs, but they don't want to constantly be a person, oh, can I do is there a lunchtime slot because I've got to do the school run, or is there somewhere we can go that doesn't have any stairs because I use a wheelchair and I won't be able to get, if there's no lift, I won't be able to get in. So I don't want to cause that awkwardness. But if we look at it from the beginning to make it as accessible as possible, then that person doesn't have the onus on them to signal that they're different. And it sounds time consuming and expensive, but it doesn't have to be. It's definitely not expensive, because actually what you'll find is you cut through a lot of layers. And most things that are needed for this, you already have within your business that are operating. And the time consuming bit only comes if you don't have people in a synergy with what you're trying to do, because then it gets stopped at each layer while someone makes a decision, or you have to have the same conversation and discussion over again to convince that person why it's the right thing to do. So I would say, what we try to do is encourage organizations who want to go on this journey, that it doesn't matter where you are or where you think you are. Actually, just acknowledging that you want to make these positive changes is a really good place to start, and actually introducing the concept to the organization as a whole. And you can do that in a fun way. So you can do that in a way where you have a keynote where somebody with a disability comes in and talks about and if you've got specific themes, obviously you can pull those in. But what it does is starts to make everyone realize that this person is human, and actually they come in and you might see their guide dog, or you might be stood there thinking, actually, what is different about you? Because that's the other thing, is people judge on what they can see.
And so actually, it was on a Zoom call. We were doing our agile HR training, and it wasn't until later I reflected, oh, she was in the Paralympics, and I couldn't quite correlate what the person I'd seen on the screen with the information that I had. So I had to go and find out what your particular disability was. It wasn't apparent to me, and it made me think about that from the perspective of
and actually 70% of people with disabilities have invisible disabilities, and that often there's a lot more anxiety and that comes with having an invisible disability than if if it's quite apparent, because people, rightly or wrongly, make allowances for people who they think they can see that something's different. But again, that has a flip, because then they make assumptions that that person can't do something. Well, no, they probably can. They might not do it like you would do it, but that doesn't mean to say they wouldn't do it. And then that goes back to the commercial value, because then we hear all the time, oh, you're so inspirational. And like, people with difference are inspirational, but it's not because they manage to do daily activities with just like everybody else. It's that they manage to do them in spite of the barriers that are there, that are necessary, so the unnecessary energy that is exerted. And so what will sometimes happen is that someone else will see somebody doing something and go, wow, actually, it's their can-do attitude, and it's their ability to not break down when they're faced with an issue, and it's their ability to tolerate people who are speaking to them like they're 3 years old, when actually they're really educated, really qualified, mid-40s, but they happen to have a disability. Like, it's that's the inspiring part. And what it does is it unites. It has the power to unite a team and unite a workforce, and actually bring people together. And whilst that sounds more like a human element and a people thing than the commercial benefit, what we've got to remember is the happier and your team is, the more productive they become, and the more willing they are to go the extra mile. And so actually, whilst again it sounds like it's a people thing, it's a commercial benefit, because then everything becomes more efficient and effective.
Okay, interesting. Okay, I've got to ask you the other question then. What goes wrong in that process when you're taking people on that journey from sort of education, inspiring potentially by giving them an example of someone who successfully works? What goes wrong? I guess there's an initial kind of enthusiasm, but on that journey, what are the pitfalls?
The most common thing that goes wrong is exactly what you alluded to earlier, in that people go, right, we're diversity and inclusion. This year we're focusing on the gender pay gap, or this year we're focusing on Black Lives Matter, or this year we're like focusing on pride. And like, it's like, no, you can do it all at the same time. Because by choosing one strand or one demographic within like the protected characteristics, or not even the protected characteristics, but like focusing on one area, again, you're going to increase diversity, but you're not going to increase inclusion, because you're excluding a whole group of people. Whereas actually, if you that's why we try to promote this idea of normalizing differences, because difference is everywhere. And actually, I would say that's the main hurdle and the main barrier for a lot of people. And also, if you do it all at the same time, it's more cost effective and time efficient, because you only have to do it once. Whereas if you have to do the same process every year for 8 years until you've like dealt with every different demographic that is protected, or whatever, however you decide to approach it, then like it's a slow process. So that's one of the major things. The other is quite often that you'll get a lot of people who are invested in it, like for a personal reason, which is great. And you need those people to drive it, to keep pushing it, to give it context. But without somebody somewhere in the organization sponsoring it and behind it that can actually sign off changes or make things happen quickly, then a lot of energy gets wasted. So like, for example, we had a really effective project with one organization, but from that initial recruitment, adaptation, change, redesign, whatever you want to call it, and then identifying a candidate who would go straight to desk and got a position, because the next phase wasn't ready. It was 4 months before they got the opportunity to go in and do their start, like even their induction. And like, so what, like, that goes back to why it can be really good to do it as a one-off introduction to the whole organization, as like a keynote or like something like that, so that everybody is aware of what the organization is trying to do. Because again, like in a small organization, perfect. Like if like you can talk, you can look across, you can talk to everybody. It's really easy. But in global organizations, it's really difficult to know, let alone what's happening, like maybe in a different office in the same city, let alone in a different office in a different continent. And so actually it's about bringing everybody together, because they are some of the biggest barriers, I think, is actually just people aren't, it goes back to this idea of awareness. And so if you like at the ability people, we underpin anything that we do, like whether it's the consulting, whether it's the recruitment, whether it's like helping with processes, whatever it is, it's like with this idea that of increasing empathy, education, and exposure to difference. Because by raising people's awareness, if that's progress, you're progressing. And then what will naturally happen is people's heads will pop up who are wanting to get involved in this and take this on, because I think so often it becomes the responsibility of one team or one department, or why don't we all like work on this together and save each other a lot of time and energy? Because again, there's the commercial value. You're only having to pay for all of this once. You're only having to make these adaptations once. And I think like the other hurdle is when people are like, oh yeah, but we can't do that because, and you're like, because what? And they're like, oh, because we have to do it like this. And you're like, why do you have to do it like this? Like, and they'll be like, oh, because it's written in our process. Yeah, but when was it written? And who does it benefit and who does it exclude? And like, so quite often it's like I said, you start where you want to end up, and you unravel as you go, because people don't understand, and like, but you can't expect them to understand. And like, I think that's the other thing that I want people to take away from today, is realizing that it's not a blame game. Like, this is not a, oh my gosh, you're not doing it properly. This is a what do you need to progress this? That's the key, is like, never, like, don't let the fact that you feel like you're going to be judged prevent you from taking the next step, whatever that next step looks like for your organization or your team, or even in your role. Because how you're feeling, that's exactly the feelings that anybody with any difference has to live their daily life with, while we don't get this sorted.
So Liz, coming back to that kind of point about making everybody part of the journey from the outset, what sort of 5 key things, or is there a kind of sort of starter toolkit that you would advise organizations, thinking about the listeners on the call today, big companies, smaller companies, are there some fundamentals that people could go away today and implement that could bring the organization together? And I mean, as you said, they're probably all in different places on their D&I journey. Are there things that you just implement as a sort of standard starting point?
I think the standards, like, it's really difficult in this situation to produce. You can produce like toolkits and coping mechanisms and like actions to follow to ensure that you're behaving correctly. But it's really difficult and actually not that helpful to provide like straight off, like, do this ABC and you'll get 1, 2, 3, because 1, it doesn't work, but 2, what tends to happen then is, again, people are so used to living by process that they follow ABC and they get 1, 2, 3. But if someone comes along who doesn't fit ABC, then where do we go from there? And like, we're stuck again. But yes, it's more about the experience and how you feel, the feelings and the way you act. So I would say the first thing is try to get a better understanding of your people. And like, I don't mean like a big survey, but I just mean and you can't do it by looking around, but you can just start to like initiate maybe on your intranet, like a chat around any like differences, and like next week's perfect because it's International Day of People with Disabilities. So like, you can just have a thread, and it can be, the best way initially is if you can make it anonymous, because then people might be more likely to bring stuff forward. And it's not necessarily have to be about them. It can be, and it does, and also I think it's about, like I said right at the beginning, that I thought we were going to get to that we didn't really, but it's around this difference between being disabled and having a disability. And the reality is, a lot of people with disabilities don't, depending on what they are, don't want to be identified as having a disability because of the negative connotation that they believe goes with it, or the experiences they've had as a result of disabilities, etc. But actually,
sorry, interrupting.
No, I was just going to say. Oh,
what time for us? The different that.
Yeah, that's where I was going right this second. So, and it goes back to that concept I was talking about when I was at school. Like, I never considered myself to be disabled, because I can do everything that everybody else does. I just do it differently. And I might have to have a different technique, or I might have to have a bit of extra equipment or support from somebody else, or rely on someone else to help me come up with an idea. But I can navigate this world that we live in, which means I'm not disabled in that situation. So, for example, completely unrelated to business or sport, but when I was at school and we got the opportunity to play a musical instrument, and I wanted to play the flute because it was pretty, and all my friends were playing the flute, and it sounded like a good idea, and it looked good. And my mum was like, well, that's not a good idea, is it? Now, bearing in mind, I was like, I think I was 7.5. She was like, well, that's not going to be a good idea, is it? And I was like, what? And she was like, well, what do you need to play the flute well? And I was like, 2 fully functional hands, or at least 2 functional hands. And she was like, well, yeah. She was like, you can play the flute if you want, but you're not going to be very good at it. Or you're not going to be as good as you could be at playing something else. So I was like, oh, fine. So we went to the local music shop and we went around all the instruments. I ended up with a cornet because it was small. You only needed 3 fingers to play the valves. And I feel like my mum probably thought the investment was better spent in my time on a cornet than it would have been on a flute. But the point was, then in the car on the way home, I was really miserable. And she said to me, look, no one else, I know it wasn't your first choice, and so do you, and so does the poor lady in the music shop, but no one else will ever know. And as far as anyone else is concerned, you're playing a musical instrument as all your peers would, without any need for assistance. Not that assistance is bad, but in this situation, I wasn't ready. I was like 7.5. I was like, I could be like everybody else. So, but the point it made me realize, and the point that she taught me, was that you're not disabled. You can do whatever you want. Society's expectations and limits are what disables somebody, but you do have a disability. Like, you don't wake up some days without cerebral palsy and some days you've got it. And that's the difference, is like, the disability is just part of who you are. Just like I have green eyes, just like I have dark hair, just like I was born in Wales, just like my birthday's in December. Having cerebral palsy is just part of who I am, whereas being disabled is not a permanent feature, and it's as a result of my disability, but it's not because of my disability. It's because of attitudes and prejudices and precedents that have been set over the years. So anybody can be disabled at any time, but not everyone's got a disability. But it's this idea. So when you're looking at this from a whole angle, it's like, what can we remove to enable this person so that the part of being disabled is no longer there? Because people look at you and make assumptions that you are or are not going to be able to do something based on what you've got available to you and your disability. But I would say, start viewing disability like your birth month. And like, would you, if you're instinctively making a decision or seeing a hurdle of someone because of their disability, would you be still saying that because they're born in October? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And there obviously are, in certain situations, there are limits. Like I wanted to be a cardiac surgeon, but I wouldn't want anybody operating on me with these hands. So therefore, it's unreasonable to expect someone to let me operate on them, right? That's not discrimination. That's a fact of life. Just like some people are tall, some people are short, some people are good at maths, some people are good at English, some people are good at art. Like, we've all got our strengths. And I think the powerful, and again, commercial value in getting this right is that you then end up with the strongest workforce available to you, but you also become empowered to make the correct decisions. So you don't then fall into that trap of going, oh, I best give that person the job because they've got a disability, or because they're female. I mean, like female and disability, like, I'll give them the person the job, because if I give the male the job, who doesn't have a disability, then people are going to say I was discriminating. But if you embedded inclusion authentically within your organisation, those questions won't be asked, because you'll be able to turn and go, well, actually, no, we've got a fully inclusive environment. On this occasion, on this day, you unfortunately, sorry, you weren't the best candidate.
Liz, we've got a really good question here that's come through. I'm just going to read it out. From a hiring manager perspective, how do we make the talent pool more diverse at the sourcing stage? Is that something you can help us with?
Yeah, so I guess with the sourcing stage, it's like we do with everything, like a lot of people do with a lot of things, in like removing as many unnecessary details as possible from the application is a great way. But then where you ask about, do you require any reasonable adjustments? Do you have a disability? Like, not everybody does, but like in a lot of our experience, a lot of people do. And like, it's how you ask that question. And it's almost like you want to, at every stage of the process, you want to give somebody the opportunity to volunteer information that they feel is necessary in order to give them the best chance of progressing. But because I always say at phase one, like, I clearly have a physical disability. If you asked me to juggle, you would notice. So if you asked me to stand on my right leg and hop, you would notice. But like, in terms of like my area of, like, I went to university, I did business management, and I specialized in finance. So I always thought I'd be an accountant. So at no point when I'm applying for an accountancy job does my impairment affect my ability to do that job just like everybody else, right? So I would not need to declare that on the form. But if I then got to an assessment centre or something, and it required, I don't know, it required something with dexterity, or it required a lot of writing, or something where you needed extra time, well, then I'm entitled to extra time. So, but I wouldn't have put that anywhere on the form, and no one would have expected me to put that on the form. So then I would get to the assessment centre and it'd be really awkward for everybody, because it wasn't set up and it wasn't right. But like, that's not my fault. So one really good way of doing things at the sourcing stage is giving as much information as possible that is relevant at that stage as the recruiter, because then what it does is it gives me the opportunity to say, oh yeah, so in that, how long does that last? Like, what are the, like, how does it work? So like, if you've got as much detail as possible, and you always provide, so you provide what would be typical, and then you provide a space for someone to say, do you think, like, for something along the lines of, is there anything else you would need to be given, like, to help you, to give you the best chance to succeed? Like, word it like that, so that then it's not a reasonable, because again, it's this idea of reasonable adjustments, because as you say adjustment or different, or have you got anything to declare, it makes you not typical. Whereas actually, if you word it in a way where you're like, is there anything you feel would be beneficial for us to know at this stage? That could be something like, I live in Glasgow, but the interview's in London, so would you be able to give me 3 days notice so I can book my flight? Like, it doesn't have to then be limited to people with disabilities. And it also then what it does is, like we say all along, is it benefits everybody. Like, you don't want it, and it removes the idea of someone going, oh, well, you only got this job because you said this, or you said that, or you're from here, or you did this. So I would say, look at your look at how you advertise as well, like how you put it out, like, because people, the language is important, but also you can actually like make people aware that you are open to difference of all kind, because people, you assume would be the case, but actually so many people have had so many negative experiences. And like, I think there's a like your the question, Joe, that's come in that you've typed in, like, it'll link into that. But like, so many people, regardless of what is supposed to be the right thing and what is the humane thing to do, we know that it's not everywhere and it doesn't exist. So if you can highlight as much as possible that you are willing and open to difference of all kinds, then that really makes a positive difference. Okay. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense.
Shall I read that question then, Liz? So it says, if I have a line manager that's clearly being biased about what they're looking for and who they are hiring in their own mold, basically, how can I change that behaviour?
That's a really, really interesting question. And I think that is often where the sticking point is, because like, as I said, you're within an organization, generally you'll have somebody within it who's very forward thinking in this area, and always had like like an experience with difference, who's like, no, it can work, it will work, I can push this. But like ultimately the hiring manager is the one who's making the calls. And so there's different ways to navigate this. And again, this is why it's important to get buy-in from above, because you sometimes need something like signed off or something to change. So one way is to create a hiring team. So like this isn't the overall solution, but it does help massively, because then that one person isn't in charge of making those decisions. And if they ask the questions why, then you can address the fact that they're biased. Because whilst it's an awkward conversation to have, why are we letting them get away with it when we know they shouldn't? So by creating a little hiring unit for that specific role that you're hiring for, it means there's more than one opinion, and you can kind of negate it that way. But also get involved in a bit of a change program around difference, and put them in the shoes of the person with the disability. And I don't mean like give them a disability, but I mean like bring it to life for them so that they can compare. And like, this is difficult to do, and this is probably where like my team come in, because this is what we do, is like we go in with a lot of different disabilities, and we take people through real life situations that happen to us, and then unpick where those people that are trying to interact with us went wrong, or why they were wrong. And actually, how would you feel if, like I said, if you couldn't do this job anymore because no one with blue eyes was allowed to be employed in this company? Like bring it to life for them. It sounds in that situation they do need some intervention, because the reason they are doing what they're doing and behaving the way they are and thinking with what they're thinking is because that's all they know. And actually, until you can send them on an unconscious bias course if you want, or you can send them on some accreditation. People do that. People watch webinars and they go, yep, tick that box for another year. Like, I'm done with my CPD, let's move on. So let's get them involved interactively with people who are different, to re-educate them. I
think some of the conversations we started within our business, we surveyed all of our clients, and overwhelmingly the unanimous response was that people wanted help and information to move in this direction. And yet, going back to sort of my point earlier, we've only actually had 2 clients do something about it. So some of the conversations I had, that there was some fear about the practical changes that people need to make. And I obviously noticed your website, I think, speaks to you. If you, rather than reading, you can hear it speaking to you. Like, I guess, is that something that you would ask people to consider in terms of sourcing? I guess the first point of contact is what, a website or an application process.
Yeah, and the website too. Like how, think about when you're like, as the recruiter, think about what your 90% of your candidates, or probably 100% of your candidates, the process that you would like them to follow in responding to your advert, getting in touch, and going through the process of trying to get the job. And then actually think, does this work for everybody? And the short answer is, again, you probably don't know the answer, because you don't need, no, I don't mean you personally, but I mean like one doesn't know the answer, because again, if it doesn't affect you, you don't think about it. So
you don't know what you don't know.
Basically. You don't know but you can't be expected to know what you've never needed to know. And you can't be blamed for not knowing, but you can be blamed for not doing anything about it. Ignorance isn't an excuse. And so one thing that we do with most of our clients, actually, one of the first things is we test their application process and their website, because our team, like I said, has got a number of different needs. And again, I'm using me as an example. A standard website would work for me. Like, there's no reason why it wouldn't. But like my visually impaired colleague, or my colleague who's got no use of their limbs, or my neurodiverse colleagues, or my colleagues with poor dexterity, like, does it work for them? My hearing impaired colleagues, does it work for them? Like, so like just one quick, like, well, I say quick, a test of the website, a report produced, gives you some really easy fixes and good direction. And again, not expensive, not time consuming, but really beneficial to the masses, and opens the doors to a wider talent pool. Because I think the one thing that we overlook so much these days is that everyone has choice. It's the 21st century, it's 2020, everybody would rather see the back of 2020, but it is this, like, we're in 2020. And so no longer do people like just want a seat at the table. They want to be able to use it. No longer is somebody grateful because you bothered to take the time to say hi to them. They've got choice and they've got spending power. And if you don't, if their first interaction with you is negative and doesn't work, they're like, if they can't even get this is the thought process. If you can't even get this bit right, what on earth am I going to have to deal with when I get into your organization? If I get into it, like, life shouldn't be a fight every single step of the way in order to access what the majority get as a standard. I think that's important. But then also, and like, we keep coming back to this commercial value of it, but again, spending power is huge, and people with disability, like I said, have choice. And so you can't expect to be able to service the community that is, that is out there, and society that is out there, if you're not reflective of them, because you won't have thought of all their needs. So being authentic and inclusive, actually, it might benefit your recruitment process, and it might benefit your day-to-day function within the four walls of your organization, so to speak, but it's going to benefit the product or the service that you deliver as well, and that the way that that's received, because communities are strong, and like with social media and with ways to connect, people become very united very quickly. And if there's a positive experience, people will shout about it, and you'll be.
Oh, I don't know if that's me that's frozen or that's her.
People will equally talk about that in a bad way, and you'll be on the back foot again.
Yeah, I think, this sort of awareness that in terms of attracting employees and attracting customers, people need to see that they can identify with your business. I mean, that's the most simple. I will buy from a business that I think understands me. I want to work for a business that I think understands me and can accommodate me. I think, we're not even aware that we think those things until you layer in something like a disability. Liz, the other question, I'm just really conscious of time because it's coming up to 10 minutes left. And I just have one question in terms of, you are an exceptional achiever. You've achieved outstanding success. You've clearly been incredibly driven from 3 years old. You started swimming.
Yeah.
That you've, and I would imagine that through that process of success and pushing yourself harder and harder and harder, you've become this incredible confident achiever that we see today. I guess not everybody has had that journey and that experience. Really naff, shouldn't have said it. That experience. But in terms of employers accommodating people that maybe don't come into a role with your confidence, your kind of chutzpah, your resilience, is there something that you can tell us in terms of advice for making sure that people are able to thrive and fulfill their potential in the workplace?
Yeah, and I think I just realised I didn't actually answer your 5 points question, so I'll try and do both at the same time. Sorry. So, but again, it's exactly that, and that goes back to that point I was making when I was talking about my experience of the Paralympics. Is like 1% of the population go to the Olympics or the Paralympics. So why are we expecting people all come through the door with that experience and with that vibrance and with that ability to transfer skills from some extraordinary achievement? And again, not just in sport, but like if you look historically about people with disabilities in history that people admire, like Stephen Hawking, like Tanegray Thompson, they've done something that then validates them, which is not fair, because if you went into your into your list of employees right now, how many of them have done something extraordinary to be validated to get into your company or your industry or whatever. And actually, that's what we need to get away from. We need to get, like, a person with a disability shouldn't have to do any more or any less to get an opportunity to show you how good they are at that job than any other candidate. So look at normalizing difference. Look at what you're asking people to do, not how they're going to do it. But also, so that's one, like, look at the what, not the how. Okay. Think to yourself, why am I thinking this? And how is it relevant? And if it isn't relevant, then don't be asking it. Because that's also something. It's like people ask intrusive questions out of interest and human intrigue rather than relevance to a role. Okay. And like 3 is like, if I change this, what is the negative impact it's going to have on the role overall? Because the answer is generally none. So for example, if you've got your application process online, but someone can't fill in the form because your form is not accessible, or actually just because they don't have the capability or the senses, by that I mean the vision or the hearing, or to be able to type and do everything or work with that, what is it that is going to be such a problem with having a button that says, like, click here and someone will call you and you talk through the form? Like, that doesn't give anybody else a disadvantage, but it just enables that person to become a player in the game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great, actually. And somebody's just put another question in, so we could just, which links nicely. Somebody's asked, practically, how can we make an office environment inclusive?
Again, this is like really difficult in terms of, because you don't know which bits of it are inclusive until you've needed to test them. So again, like, one great thing is having doing an environment assessment where people like quite often we do this, where like our team will go in and just spend a couple of days in the environment, because so often we think of the obvious things. We think of a ramp, we think of a lift, we think of a low desk, we think of an accessible toilet, but has our accessible toilet got a hoist? Or are our walls that we've put in to make the office feel more airy, are they glass so a visually impaired person would just walk straight into them? Or is there a quiet zone for those who have sensory overload can go, but they don't have to ask for permission to leave and go somewhere else or work from home? They've got a zone that they can go and sit in and work quietly and effectively. So it's about, I would say that practically there's so many things you can do. In terms of accessing a building, is it swipe card? Is it like censored doors? Do you have the rotating doors? Because again, they're a problem, because we went to a client once and they had those rotating doors, but they also had a door that, if you couldn't go through a rotating door, there was a door. But through the rotating door, you could just go through it in your own time. If you were going through the door that was mostly closed, then what would happen is you would have to wait for someone to see you on a camera and decide to let you in. Now, it's only a small thing, but it's not an equitable experience. It means anybody that was required to use that door because they, for some reason, can't use the rotating door, doesn't have the same ability to access the building as somebody who can just toddle through the door whenever they want. So when you're looking at making an office environment inclusive, like, look again at, like, does it suit everybody? Am I missing something? What would I do if? Ask yourself those questions. And quite often these things are brought to light when someone has an injury and breaks their leg, or breaks their arm, or has an eye operation but comes back to work. All of a sudden you notice things that are problematic, but nobody's ever needed to notice before. So again, a really good way is doing one of those environmental assessments. And again, it's similar to the website application. We just come in, spend a couple of days, give you a report, and then look at how you're going to proceed. Because I think so often we focus on the physical elements with disability and difference, but actually it's those unseen things that we need to be more aware of. So I guess one of the point on your list of 5 would be like, how would I feel if? Like, keep asking yourself that question. How would I feel if I couldn't do this because of the month I was born in? Like, keep asking yourself that question. And like, if you can answer it and like and validate it, then fine. But if you can't, then it probably doesn't apply to somebody with a disability either. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then my fifth point would just be simply to finish, like, don't be scared. Like, there's nothing to fear here. Like, take that step, make this happen. Not because, I mean, it is the right thing to do, but like, it's not the right thing to do because process requires it or legislation expects it. Do it because we're all human and we're never that far away from being that person that needs help.
Good point. Good point to leave with. Liz, I'm really conscious that we're 2 minutes away from the end. I think we've recorded this. You know, it says recording there. And I'm assuming you're on LinkedIn, so everybody who's on the call can reach out to you and connect with you. Is there anything else that we should leave people with before we part today?
I think like I said, I managed to get my 5 points in, but like that idea of like, don't fear this, but also don't take the burden on by yourself. Like, this is a united, collaborative goal, and actually don't look at it as I have to do this now and this later. Just start the conversations, get the help from where you need. Like, you won't be judged if you're attempting to do the right thing.
Thank you so much. And I think from everybody at Vertical Advantage, we just absolutely thrilled to know you and to be, you know, lucky enough to have an inside line to tap through Steve and be introduced to you. I'm sure we'll be back to you for more at some point, and hopefully we'll get to work together again. But thank you very, very much for today, and thanks for everybody for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.